And more breaking news, Nebraska has a new director of prisons.
The governor says he's a nationally recognized criminal justice expert.
Brian Mastery tonight on how the new hire plans to navigate the challenges of Nebraska's overcrowded prisons.
The state penitentiary in Lincoln is Nebraska's oldest prison, first opened more than 150 years ago. Water pipes keep breaking, forcing an already overcrowded facility to pack inmates more tightly. The state is poised to spend $350 million to replace it, 1,500 beds. But some lawmakers have argued that if the state doesn't come up with meaningful prison reform, Nebraska will need to build again soon.
His presence, his character and integrity, his experience.
This afternoon, Governor Pillen explained why the current director of corrections in Illinois is the best candidate to lead Nebraska corrections.
We got to make sure that we're preparing people to be successful when they release. And if we start looking at the recidivism rate, I think not just in Nebraska, but it's across the nation, we want to make sure that we have people success so they can go out and go back onto the community and be, prospering citizens.
Rob Jeffries says what he sees happening in Nebraska, understaffed and overcrowded, while strapped with aging facilities, is happening across the country.
I need to be able to put my feet on the ground, talk with the team, see what's currently being done. I don't want to speak from the hip about how the solution should be about the overcrowding. I know that's a priority for us to look at the overcrowding. I know it's a priority for us to look at the infrastructure, but these two things are not mutually exclusive.
Jeffries says he worked with stakeholders while in Illinois towards meaningful change. He says he decided to come to Nebraska because the governor, in his view, is serious about public safety, while also being invested in the humanity of those behind bars. On your side in Lincoln, Brian Mastery, 6 News.
New prison director will make a salary of $210,000.